France is in the game, and Mirage jets and missiles are already on their way. Putin is having a meltdown, Agavki are on the horizon. The US is preparing weapons for Ukraine that are causing panic in the Kremlin. The negotiations have turned everything upside down. Washington has taken this step. NATO is sounding the alarm, and Ukraine is being urgently given access to ammunition stockpiles. And that's not all. Europe is now fully backing Ukraine. Starlink and Russian didn't take off. Russia's technological failure, Galil front. In 2027, Ukraine will be in the EU. A statement that made Moscow lose its mind? I'll tell you all the details next. Greetings from Ukraine. Today, Rinat Aslanov and the latest events. Mirage fighter jets and air defense missiles. Military aid from France. It's already on the way. Ukraine's Minister of Defense Mikhailo Fedorov had a phone conversation with his French counterpart Catherine Vautrin. He reported that they discussed the supply of ammunition and long-range weapons to Ukraine. They also discussed the additional transfer of Mirage aircraft to Ukraine and countering Russia's shadow fleet.
I am grateful for the willingness to deliver additional French-made missiles in the near future.
Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that certain EU countries have significant stockpiles of interceptor missiles for air defense systems and can transfer them to Ukraine.
I could confidentially inform you, but not in an open session, about exactly who is sitting on large stockpiles of interceptors. The Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO's Joint Armed Forces stated that he fully agrees that a significant portion of these weapons should be transferred to Ukraine, as this is clearly the current priority.
He drew the attention of the members of the European Parliament to the fact that every night between 20 and 50 missiles and hundreds of drones are launched at Kyiv, Lviv, Kharkiv, and other major population centers in Ukraine.
The interception rates have dropped, and this has happened because some NASAM systems currently in Ukraine do not have a sufficient number of interceptor missiles to fend off the attacks. Patriot systems also require a constant supply of interceptor missiles. He
noted that there are two ways to address this shortage.
The first is aid packages from the US and EU, since a significant part of these systems consist precisely of interceptors for NASAMS and Patriot complexes. The second is what you have in your own national arsenals. Wherever possible, help put pressure on your government to make this happen. Some governments are already taking action.
At the same time, the Bundestag has called for providing Ukraine with more air defense systems and Taurus missiles. The co-chair of the German opposition party, the Greens, urged the government to strengthen Ukraine's air defense in light of increased Russian attacks and to provide Kyiv with support. Long-range weapons? Notably, in the United States, there has been talk about providing Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Discussions about this had taken place before, but for unknown reasons, the issue was put on hold. Now, however, this weapon could become an argument for Trump to force Vladimir Putin to end the war. Alexander Musyenko, a serviceman of the Territorial Defense Forces, emphasized that the Kremlin is beginning to suspect that things might not be going very well for Russia, all because there is unpredictability and a certain inconsistency in Trump's actions.
And this could be very unpleasant for Russia. The United States is now taking the position of an active mediator as they want a quick end to the war. This is no secret.
Despite pressure from the American administration on Ukraine emphasizing that our government should be ready for peace, Volodymyr Zelensky successfully met with Trump in Davos. As a result, it is likely that an agreement was reached on the supply of additional air defense missiles for our country. In addition, discussions continue regarding the $800 billion plan for Ukraine's reconstruction.
There is also a position regarding Russia. America is negotiating with Kirill Dmitriev about restoring economic ties and about Russia's prospects if it stops the war against Ukraine. But there are also means of pressure. Right now, the issue of Tomahawks has arisen. The Kremlin is very afraid of this.
Putin's inner circle understands that Tomahawk missile strikes would be even more negative than other Ukrainian attacks with less powerful weapons. This would seriously affect the capabilities of the Russian budget, particularly the income from oil and gas sales. Musyenko believes that the US is doing this for a reason. They have intensified these discussions. This statement was likely made on the eve of the next round of negotiations so that the Kremlin would seriously consider the approach of the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. In Washington, the influence of the group supporting Ukraine is growing. They believe that the only way to force Putin to negotiate is to sharply strengthen Kyiv's position. One of the newly discussed ideas is Ukraine's proposal regarding Tomahawk cruise missiles. about how the US continues to support Ukraine and wear down the Russian Federation. Next.
Tomahawks for the armed forces of Ukraine in the US. A new strategy to pressure the Kremlin. Washington debates striking deep into Russia to pressure Putin to negotiate. A small group of Ukraine's supporters in Washington claims that the only way to force the Russian dictator to come to the negotiating table is to significantly strengthen Kyiv's position, and this can be done with the help of missiles, Tomahawk.
As last year's experience showed, as soon as the United States even mentioned Tomahawk missiles, Putin immediately began to display the highest level of constructiveness, or rather tried to appear constructive, and did everything possible to show that he wanted peace. As soon as Putin realized that there would be no Tomahawk missiles in Ukraine, that was it. After that, the campaign to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure began, along with acts of terrorism against Ukrainian cities.
At the center of this initiative is Dan Rice, president of the American University in Kyiv and former special advisor to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, who held a meeting with the US Secretary of Defense, according to Kyiv Post.
Putin only responds to strength. If he does not agree to peace, then in my opinion, there is a high likelihood that President Trump will approve the use of Tomahawks.
Rice refused to disclose the details of the meeting, calling most of the conversation confidential. However, he did reveal what exactly he proposed. According to him, he directly asked the Secretary of Defense to provide Ukraine with Tomahawks, even if it was a small, undisclosed number.
Even if we are given 20, 30 or 50 missiles, it won't make much of a difference. We need hundreds of missiles per month to have at least some kind of leverage over the Russian Federation. And now for the latest figures, the Russians launch per month. In Ukraine, there are about 300 different missiles launched per month. We need to launch at least as many, preferably more. Only then can we really put pressure on the Russian Federation.
Ukraine tried to obtain these missiles from the US even during Biden's term. But up to now, Tomahawks have still not been adopted by the Ukrainian army.
It is believed, again, we don't know for sure, but rumor has it, online sources say that the United States can produce about 100 missiles per year. 100 missiles per year. So for the average person, it might seem, well, 100, that sounds like a lot. 100 missiles, that's a lot, right? But let's look at it from another angle. The cost of each missile, according to various estimates, could be $2 million per missile or $4 million, as, for example, when the Americans once sold them to Japan. So, for themselves, it's a little over 2 million, but for the Japanese, it's 4.25 million per missile. In other words, these are large sums. It would seem that if money isn't the issue, then the problem lies in the quantity.
Therefore, whether Trump will approve the supply of Tomahawks remains an open question. While some officials believe that American missiles could indeed become a lever of influence on Russia during negotiations, others fear that the transfer of Tomahawks, on the contrary, will undermine diplomatic efforts.
If the United States had clearly stated that, in the event Russia destroys Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Ukraine would receive Tomahawk missiles, I guarantee that nothing like what is happening now would have occurred. But the United States has a different approach. They are trying to persuade Putin in a friendly way to maintain good relations with him, and everything is along those lines. Therefore, to be honest, I don't really believe that the United States under Trump would give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles.
Let us recall that American Tomahawk cruise missiles are capable of storing up to 15 pre-programmed targets in their memory. And they can change their target destination directly in flight, as well as carry either nuclear or conventional warheads.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Meanwhile, in Russia, the launch of the Russian analog of Starlink has failed. The Kremlin is desperately trying to replace Elon Musk's technology to avoid dependence on the West, but so far it's not working. That's why the Russian army is using Starlink in the traditional way, but they're applying it in a new manner. We'll explain in this report why Russians are attaching Starlink to their drones and why they haven't managed to create their own satellite communication system.
In these shots, we see the well-known Russian drone Molnya. But there's something unusual about this UAV, a Starlink device mounted right on its body. At the beginning of December, the Russians started attaching satellite communication modems to their drones. Such drones are not affected by electronic warfare systems, but bypassing EW is far from the only reason for this upgrade to Russian UAVs.
They are looking for solutions that could enhance the capabilities of strike assets. And it is precisely the Starlink terminals that provide this opportunity because they guarantee a high-quality communication channel. Of course, there is some delay. Obviously, this significantly increases the cost of the strike systems, but we understand that it is still much cheaper than using, for example, missiles like the KH-101 or Iskander.
The arsenal of drones that Russia is so actively strengthening is expanding. These are already images of the BM-35 drone to which a Starlink has been attached. Such a UAV has probably already reached Dnipro and even Kiev. This Russian technology has also reached the Shaheds. Manually operated drones were flying almost at ground level to avoid being detected by radar. According to radio technology specialist and advisor to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Serhiy Flesh-Beskresny, one of these Shaheds struck helicopters. This method of so-called drone optimization is relatively new, but the Kremlin understands that Ukraine will soon find a way to counter such UAVs. But Russia has no intention of abandoning the idea of strengthening its strike capabilities with satellite communications. That is why they are working on creating their own domestic version of Starlink.
The enemy is looking for a solution to create its own communication system that will allow it to operate in the same mode. Therefore, these intentions are a direct attempt to replace the existing Starlink with their own communication system, which would allow them to control and use it independently, without any complications, such as sanctions or other issues that Russians currently face when purchasing Starlink terminals.
But so far the Russians have not managed to surpass or even catch up with Elon Musk. The launch of the Russian analog of Starlink has failed in Russia.
As people say in our country, it would be funny if it weren't so sad.
According to Russian media, the launch of the first batch of low-orbit broadband internet satellites has been postponed indefinitely, as the authorities have failed to realize their ambitious plans.
According to two sources in the space industry, the launch of the first 16 satellites has been postponed to 2026. This may be due to the fact that the required number of satellites has still not been assembled. For their part, Bureau 1440 stated that the company is carrying out work according to the planned schedule and promised to provide updates on the project's progress as it moves through each stage. Exact launch dates and other sensitive information are not subject to disclosure.
It is unclear how the Kremlin plans to proceed with the deployment of 156 satellites in 2026.
We will give our response. To Starlink with the Dawn project, Bureau 1440.
It's been more than half a year since work on the project began in May 2025, and there are exactly 0 of the promised satellites in orbit.
If they work hard, in any case, they could build some kind of similar system. But let's remember that even in the Soviet Union there were problems, significant problems specifically with satellite systems, which could provide the capabilities that, for example, American satellites offer. That's why, without a doubt, there are plenty of people eager to squander Russian money and, so to speak, present various projects that, even at the planning stage, can already be called unsuccessful. But all of this is packaged nicely and sold to the Kremlin leadership.
The aerospace company that took on the development of a Starlink analog and began work on creating Russian satellite communications started earlier. In 2023 and 2024, Bureau 1440 began testing the technologies. There were even experimental missions, as a result of which 6 devices were launched. But this is not what Putin expected.
The creation of powerful satellite constellations is intended to ensure high-quality navigation and communications, including satellite data transmission.
Now, the discussion is about the commercial aspects, scaling, and government funding. Putin allocated almost $1.5 billion for the domestic Starlink. And that's not surprising because the bunker dictator really likes Elon Musk's invention as well as Musk himself.
As for Elon Musk's private business, he is undoubtedly an outstanding person. That must be acknowledged.
In 2025, the company planned to launch 150 to 180 satellites per year. By 2035, the constellation is supposed to include more than 900 satellites. Under the conditions of Kremlin import substitution, this is not just an unrealistic goal, but according to military political analyst Alexander Kovalenko, borders on schizoid absurdity.
At the time this statement was made, there was already a sense of mockery surrounding the Dawn project. All the more so since Bureau 1440 launched the first 6 test satellites in 2023. Dawn. These provided data transfer speeds of up to 12 megabits per second with a latency of up to 41 milliseconds. But the nuance with these satellites is that they were assembled, they were made mostly from Western components, the supply of which is now closed to Russia due to sanctions.
It is possible that Russia may ask for help from its partners and use Iranian and Chinese technologies. But for that to happen, people in Russia would have to want their own Starlink more than they want to steal money. Let us explain. Back in 2018, the then head of Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogozin, had already promised Putin a Starlink made in Russia. But the ambitious Sfera project turned into an equally ambitious budget siphoning scheme. At that time, the project was estimated at $60 billion.
Space exploration should become much more significant, a factor in national development.
The new project, although cheaper, faces even more problems in its creation, but Putin is being promised yet another domestic innovation.
And here's another batch of not-so-good news for Putin. In 2027, Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. These are the conditions for ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. This was stated to journalists by Serbian President Vučić. What are they saying in the Kremlin? And what will EU membership bring to Kyiv? Find out next.
In 2027, Ukraine will become a member of the European Union. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić made an unexpected statement. According to him, Ukraine's accelerated accession to the European Union is part of a possible peace plan between Kyiv and Moscow.
I'm telling you what I've heard somewhere, and I wouldn't be saying this if it weren't true. So I found out that part of the plan is a peace plan if Russia and Ukraine reach it, because not only will both sides be obligated to fulfill it, but also a significant part of the international community. One part of the plan is for Ukraine to become a member of the European Union.
We're talking about an unprecedentedly fast scenario of European integration, with Ukraine joining the EU as early as January 1st, 2027.
These are absolutely unrealistic timeframes. Absolutely. There are no such plans in the European Union, and it's also important to keep in mind that it's far from certain that an agreement to end the war between Russia and Ukraine will be reached by 2026.
Moreover, talk of Ukraine's accelerated accession to the EU is most likely just part of a deliberate fake information and political campaign by friends of the Kremlin. In particular, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is using this topic in the run-up to the elections.
This is one of his black, dirty pre-election tactics to scare Hungarians with the claim that Ukraine will supposedly be fast-tracked into the European Union and that all the benefits, preferences and subsidies, the EU's agricultural subsidies, will go only to Ukraine. Why is the president of Serbia repeating this, who, like Orban, has a special relationship with Russia? Because Serbia also wants to join the European Union, but it doesn't want to play by European rules.
But what is actually realistic for 2027 is Ukraine's readiness to join the European Union. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, it is important for Kyiv to secure a specific date for joining the EU directly in the agreement to end the war. According to him, this will provide clear security guarantees and help avoid the possible blocking of membership.
One of the security guarantees for Ukraine is membership in the European Union, and that's exactly why we always say the year 27. Guitaro says by the year 30.
As of today, 2030 is a more realistic date. The European Commission emphasizes that despite the war, Ukraine is demonstrating significant progress. The European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, previously stated that Kyiv is actively implementing reforms and should become an EU member as soon as possible, provided all necessary conditions are met. This position is also confirmed by European Commission representative Guillaume Mercier. According to him, Ukraine has already completed the legislative screening, is making progress in key areas, and has adopted important roadmaps, from the rule of law to public administration reform and the protection of minority rights.
We need to go through all the procedures. For example, Hungary even blocked the opening of the first clusters. But negotiations still began, substantive negotiations, and then simply, after that, it will be formalized legally to open and close these clusters. There are in total 3.5 such negotiation topics. This also takes time, usually 2 to 3 years. Then comes the political decision of the European Union, the consent of the European Commission, the European Council, and then ratification by each EU country. As for Russia's position, Russia is categorically against Ukraine's membership in NATO. But now official Russian representatives are showing, let's say, some flexibility here.
For Ukraine, EU membership is not only a step toward economic development, but also a symbol of a final break with the Soviet past, and under the current conditions of war, an indirect guarantee of security.
Yes, the European Union is not a military political bloc. It is not a military alliance, but nevertheless it is a political union. If Russia attacks Ukraine, the European Union is already helping us now. At present it is our main partner, providing us with economic, financial and military support. And if we become part of it, then all the more so. Most EU countries are also members of NATO. This Ukraine continues to demonstrate an extraordinary level of resilience and determination as the nation navigates through an incredibly complex and challenging period in its modern history, steadfastly maintaining its sovereignty while the international community watches closely and provides various forms of support to ensure its enduring stability and future prosperity in the face of ongoing adversity and global geopolitical shifts.
To demonstrate its readiness for accelerated European integration, but the key question remains with Europe. Will it be able to? Will the entire Union be able to agree on a specific date for membership? Today, there are countries standing in the way that traditionally block the process. Hungary and Slovakia. It is precisely in their hands that the keys to accelerated European integration lie. But the political map of Europe is not static. By 2030, elections will be held in these countries. Parliamentary seats may change, and with them, the positions of the blocking forces as well.
And what do you think about the latest events? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come.